If y'all can, come on up and take your seats. We'll get started here momentarily. I think we've got some members I've heard from that may be coming in a little bit later, but we're going to go ahead and try to stay on schedule as much as possible. And we want to welcome our incoming chairwoman of our Highways and Transportations Committee, Senator Jennifer Branning, is going to be your new improved leader of this committee, and so we want to welcome her to the committee. And we have a new vice chair coming in, the esteemed Senator Barbara Blackmon, who's probably the dean of this committee at this point. Based on your years of service, I don't see anybody here that's been here any longer than you, so this committee will be in wonderful hands. And so thank you all for being here. We've got quite an agenda here. We've got, looks like about 6 speakers or thereabouts for different topics this afternoon. And then tomorrow morning, we've got a few as well, starting at 9 a.m. So we're going to ask each of the speakers to speak roughly for 20 minutes on whatever your prepared remarks would be. And then if you could leave a couple of 5-10 minutes sort of at the end for Q&A, that we want our membership to be able to ask questions and try to keep us on a schedule to be out of here by maybe 5 o'clock or thereabouts this afternoon, and we'll start again in the morning at 9 a.m. So with that, I will ask Senator Chairman Branning if she would like to make any remarks.
Good afternoon. I just want to say that I really look forward to serving with each of you. I'm very excited about this committee. This will be my first term to be involved with the committee, but certainly I work with a lot of local transportation issues within my district, and Melinda McGrath, I saw her earlier. She and I have a good relationship, and I look forward to working with the committee members and as well as everyone that has taken time to attend today. And I appreciate Chairman Fillingham for being willing to help me in the transition. So I guess we'll move to our first speaker on the agenda. And who we have, Mr. Harry Lee James is coming to talk to us from the State Aid Road Construction. Come right on up. If the speakers, if you would come up to the podium so that we can hear you a little bit better during your presentation.
Mr. James, welcome. And as I'll remind all of our speakers, I think when you were contacted, certainly we want to hear about infrastructure issues generally, anything you might want to share with us from your particular perspective. We certainly want to hear about funding of infrastructure and alternate funding. We've all heard about gasoline taxes and things of that nature. We've been talking about that. That's an ongoing conversation. Certainly, if you want to mention those, you're certainly welcome to do that. But we'd also like to hear about any alternative measures and sources of infrastructure funding that you might know about. And with that, Mr. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman to be, or soon to be, whenever that takes place. Thank you for the invitation to be here. A lot of you are probably wondering, why in the world are you going first? Well, it's something I learned in high school. Go first, and you either set the bar high or you set it low, and then you walk away and set the stage for everybody else and get it out of the way. I'm Presbyterian too, so you say, man, went ahead and took that hit, I'm done with it. So it's going to happen one way or the other. So again, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to come and talk about transportation funding as well as the Office of State Aid Roads. I am the state aid engineer. So I thought it was a little bit odd when Christy called and asked, and told me about this meeting and what the topic was to be, and the topic was not to be about increasing the fuel tax. At least that's kind of what I took the subject matter to be. I thought that was a little bit, because how do you talk about transportation funding at some point without talking about the fuel tax? I mean, because right now, that is basically how transportation is funded. There are other sources of funding for it, but the fuel tax is by and large the largest source of funding for transportation for us and others as well. So you can't really go there without it, though I'm not going to dwell on that subject because, again, that's not what we're here for. Okay, if we're not going to talk about fuel tax, then what other sources of revenue are you going to tap to fund transportation? I mean, it's going to come from somewhere. The use tax that was passed in 18 has been very beneficial for the counties. Some of the incremental taxes that have been put in place through lottery, sports betting, we're getting some of our money now from the hybrid and electric taxes, privilege taxes and things. But last time I looked, I haven't seen anybody come up to me and say, hey, here's a bucket of money. I want to spend this on transportation. I mean, where is that going to come from? And we know that's the legislature's job to do that. I'm a strong advocate, supporter of more money going to transportation, but y'all are the ones that got to figure out what that source is going to be. Everybody benefits from transportation. Everybody, even or not, whether you buy fuel or not at a gas station, because the goods and services that are brought to you that are available in the stores that you buy and everything, I mean, they've got to come down the road to get to wherever that point of sale is. So everybody benefits from it. So does it not make sense when y'all are looking at places to generate that revenue to look at things that do affect everybody? And not just the people that buy the fuel. If you don't want to raise the fuel tax, that's fine. And I honestly, I don't want to pay any more fuel tax than we pay now, though I would if that's what it came down to. But if there are other things that are out there that are available, then certainly I think we as an economy, as an agency, and also as Mississippi in general, need to look under every rock that is out there. Again, the incremental sources of funding that have come into play over the past few years, particularly for the Office of State Aid Roads, have worked well for the local level, not necessarily through the funds that come through state aid, but the funds that go to the cities and the counties. The ERBR program has worked out well so far. I mean, we've done a lot of good things with it in conjunction with the resources of MDOT that have been provided to the counties, and then we work with the counties to leverage that money to maximize it with their access to their program funds to be able to keep projects moving forward and everything. So, doing something like that again, when money's available to do it, to fund it. The problem is to fix everything at the county level, you need at least 4 times that program to do it, to really make some headway. And you don't want to do it all at one time. It needs to be slow and steady, just like anybody that's familiar in the financial industry. You don't want just, real fast growth in any one industry. It needs to be slow and steady and sustainable. And that's the big thing with any funding that's provided to transportation. Sustainability is the big issue. I know that was one of the biggest concerns I had with the LSBP program, Local System Bridge Program, was that even though it seemed to have a constant funding source, it was kind of stop and start with the bond programs that would come in through the legislature or other sources of funding when they were provided. But as opposed to the state aid program, which receives a minimum amount of money each month from the fuel tax, they know that's going to be their minimum year, month in and month out. And the same thing now with the use tax going to fund LSBP, it creates that same steady situation where they know that they've got this money to count on moving forward through a board term, because we work typically on a 4-year board term, and we're soon to finish that first year of that. One of the other things too, and I think we're fortunate. Some others may not think that way, but just as you would with an investment portfolio, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Diversify transportation funding as well. I mean, look at having multiple sources. I was good friends with the former director of the Florida DOT a number of years ago, and I asked him, I said, how in the world do y'all do all the things that you do in Florida? And what's the key to it? He says, we have many pots of money that we tap. He said, we've got things going on everywhere. And they got so many miles of coastline that they deal with, both on the Atlantic and the Gulf. They got lots of interstate. Just a lot of things going on. They've got obviously a tremendous tourism industry down there that's helps them a lot. So they're able to do a lot of things that others are not. Of course, they have a lot of exposure that a lot of other states do not, too, because of that coastline. You think of the 26 or 27 hurricanes, storms that have developed in this season. That's just a record. One of the things that I would strongly suggest, and I think it was done maybe at some point in the past, but I'm not sure to what extent, would be to look at all the current sources of funding for transportation, including the fuel tax, and just make sure that you're not getting what is known as leakage, some taxes that are not being collected, and making sure that everything is kind of up to date. I mean, we live in a completely different world than we did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Our mobility is different. We look at things differently than we did, many years ago. Transportation funding ought to be seen as an investment and not just as an expense. And when you look at it that way, then you want to invest in something that's going to produce the most return, give you the biggest bang for the buck. So it's good to have those multiple pots of money, because COVID could have really ripped, the funding for many things apart. Again, thankfully, I don't think it was quite as bad. At least we didn't get it as bad. But we were fortunate. We had a floor under 2 of our main programs. So it was, we really didn't have to check up that much on what we were doing other than adjust for the new normal, so to speak. We need to make sure when you're reviewing that the current policies that are out there, making sure that again the language in them is current to what we're looking at today, the way we way we operate, the way transportation system is, and that we're not losing money for certain things. There's a term in code, and it's first time I found it was it's tied to the privilege tags, but it says reasonable compensation for the use of roads. Who can tell me what reasonable compensation is for the use of a road? Is it the price of a car tag? Is it the price of fuel, fuel tax, 18.4 cents a gallon? Or what? I mean, there's somebody needs to make that call. It's kind of like, well, how long is a piece of string? And so what it's tied to, I guess, as much as anything. So, again, things have changed over the past 30 years, and we need to make sure that we are getting the most bang for the buck out of what we are getting before we start looking at new things. And I'm not saying we don't need to look at new things, because actually 15 years ago we were having the same conversation about how to raise more money for transportation when I was at MDOT back in the early 2000s. One of the areas that concerns me, and I think it would help the counties tremendously as well as the locals, is tags, car tags, trailer tags. There are all kinds of, who doesn't know somebody out there that's in the lawn care business? Or who doesn't have a fishing boat or something, or got a good buddy that goes fishing? I see $30,000 boats going down the Natchez Trace on probably a $5,000 trailer with no tag. Why can't we get the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, their enforcement people, when they check a boat registration, check a registration on a trailer as well? If they don't have a tag, give them a citation for it. Same thing, Scott, with down there at the ports on the coast. I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities out there to do things. Another area is construction. There's plenty of rental places out there that rent air compressors, rent welders, things that you tow behind a truck, and I can guarantee you will not find any one of those pieces of equipment with a tag on it. They're towed behind a truck, and we know that those pieces of equipment don't do any damage typically to the road, just like a car doesn't do any damage to the road. It's the heavy trucks is what kills us. But they do have flats, they have blowouts, things get blown off of them and everything, which requires litter control and other things to be picked up. And doing things like that costs money. I mean, it's nothing that's free. So that, you know, it would help the counties, just anything incrementally to give them more money in their coffers to be able to address things like that, I think would go a long way. Again, enforcement of tag laws, even, you know, car tags on, you know, rental and lease vehicles and everything. I see an awful lot of vehicles with a Texas tag on them, and I think, where are all these Texas tags coming from? What are they here? It may even, you know, help with human trafficking or whatever too. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity when my youngest daughter graduated from high school. We took her to Hawaii. You're talking about a captive environment down there with rental cars and things. You know everybody, the cars that are down there, they're marked. You know, they got a Hawaii tag on them, and if they're a leased vehicle, they're identified, and so you know exactly where those things are coming from. It bothers me when I go by an Enterprise or somewhere else and I see all these cars coming in with Alabama tags on them, Georgia tags, wherever else, and I don't know that they ever get any kind of, you know, Mississippi, you know, touch to them, so they're paying something on. I'm sure there is something out there, but again, that's something we ought to look at because we're a much more mobile society than we were many years ago. Back to the trailer tags, construction equipment, boats. You know, every Bubba's got a lawn service, and the majority of them don't have a tag on those trailers. I saw 12 trailers yesterday come to work that didn't have tags on them. Some of them were just hauling four-wheelers. Some of them were hauling, you know, other types of equipment or whatever. And it's not very much for them, you know, and if you had to, you'd go and do something on a, you know, an annual basis. Well, supposedly they're supposed to be on an annual basis, but even if you did it one time, trailers by statute, all trailers are supposed to have a tag. I mean, that's in code. Not all trailers require registration or title, so it just depends on how much weight they carry. So that may be an area of you know, interest there that people could look at and see if there was something that could, you know, generate some revenue. And none of these are big ticket items. But sometimes you take a lot of little stuff, kind of like when you compound interest on money, you know, before you know it, you know, it all adds up and you've got something, you know, fairly big that you can deal with. A few years ago, I think in 18, the user, you call it a user fee, a tank owner's fee on underground storage tanks was doubled. There are probably a lot of fees out there like that that could be doubled, that could generate a little bit more income and probably a warranted, you know, to be brought up to, you know, current cost. And I think the reason for doubling it was, well, it just costs more to, you know, run the program and do some other things with it. Well, that's true. Most everything does cost more than it did years ago. So if something is not sustaining itself and you're having to, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul to keep something in play, it's probably time to look at something, upgrading some of those sources of incomes with the fees and things that might help. A couple of other things. You want to talk about possibly some new sources of revenue? We got two major manufacturers of cars in the state now that we didn't have back, 20 years ago. We've got two tire manufacturers that were not here years ago. Again, you got the rented and leased cars. What about Uber and some of the other, you know, ride-sharing services and everything? Are they taxed for what they do, other than the tax on the vehicle, whatever? I'm throwing a lot of questions out there for you, but I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do is plant the seed and let y'all grow the crop, so to speak. And this is an odd one, I thought. Lubricating oil tax, 2 cents per quart. That's 8 cents a gallon. We think that's a little bit low for what. I can remember when I could buy Quaker State oil at Kmart for 99 cents a quart and change the oil in my truck. And now you can't hardly buy anything that's less than $4 or $5 a quart anywhere you go. So, you know, maybe something needs to be looked at. And what about does that include the oil that goes in these new vehicles that are manufactured at Toyota and Nissan? I mean, just look at things like that may, you know, come into play. Also, that when you buy a quart of oil at a you know, AutoZone or something, the sales tax on that oil, where does it go? Does it go into the general fund or anything else that you buy for a headlight or whatever? Should we be looking at diversion of those sales taxes into a transportation-related fund that could help offset some things? Just, like I say, just bring a lot of stuff up. Here's the big one, though. Swiping fees for electronic funds is a gold mine. If we could ever figure out a way to tap into that, and this would have to be, it wouldn't have to be a dime a swipe. It could be like 1/10 of a cent. How many of you out there have not used a credit card today of some type of electronic payment system, whatever? It's amazing at the number of transactions out there. My daughter, she'll whip out a debit card or whatever and pay for a 50-cent drink at a Quick Stop in a heartbeat using a debit card. So if you were getting just a little bit off of each one of those, again, it could pop up some money right quick. And it's not going away. I used to be a cash society, and those that are older of us still like the cash, but the younger ones, they like the convenience of the electronic payments. We all know that economic development is tied to transportation. That's a given. I don't think any of us could say that one does not go hand in hand with the other. We also know that agriculture is Mississippi's largest industry by and large, and touches the entire state. And I'm talking about from the shrimp harvesting on the coast to timber harvesting up in the northeast to the cotton farming and all up in the delta and everything. Agriculture is a big industry in the state. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that the condition of the local roads and bridges, whether they're closed or load posted or whatever, is not impacting negatively the economy at the local level, rural level. It's got to have at least be a throttle on it and holding it back from what it could be. Whether it's those closed bridges or whether it's a low-weight road, because there are quite a number of low-weight roads that are out there that are still in existence, both on the county system and the state maintained system. So something like that. There are lots of areas to be funded, but you can't swallow that whole apple at one time. You got to take it one bite at a time. And I'll leave you with this, the last thing to show you how successful the ERBR program has done, and I have to brag on my MDOT folks for that. And I do still claim them, even though some of them don't claim me still, I think. But there are actually more than 200 bridges that have been taken off the closed bridge list than were back in 2018. The current number is 323. It was 542 on April the 10th, 2018. So something is working somewhere. There's no old saying, if you keep doing the same thing you've been doing for a long time, you get the same results. That's the definition of insanity. Well, we're doing something the same way for a while, and we are seeing results. So let's keep on doing what has been working. Again, I commend y'all for what y'all have before you, what you have to deal with. We've got the easy job. Y'all have got the hard job to do. And that's all I have to say, but I will. And Christy, I'm going to drop this on you. I'm going to send you a PDF of this. This is a document produced by the Department of Revenue back in 2013. It's kind of a Bible on fuel tax and some things that were out there. Kathy Waterbury with DOR put it together. She's now retired. It'd be great to get it updated, but a lot of things have not changed in there other than some of the incremental taxes that are out there. But I'll send her a PDF, and you may want to get that out to all the committee members or anybody that wants it. It's a public document. So, okay, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer. Again, I hope I've set the bar high enough for the people that follow me.
Thank you, Mr. James. Any questions by committee members? Great. Thank you. Oh, Senator. Yes, go for it, Senator Blackman.
Thank you. Possible new sources of revenue to tire manufacturers and car manufacturers. We have some kind of tax or
No, I'm just saying that there are things that weren't in existence 20 years ago, and some of these statutes that are in place now that we're collecting, taxes on or date back to the, 50s and 60s or whatever. So do you need to look and see if there is something out there that may generate? And it may not be the vehicle itself. It may be some component of it as it's brought in. But I would say at this point, nothing's off the table.
You refer to the state oil and what amount, what the tax is. Do you know what year that was imposed?
Pardon me,
Do you know what year that was imposed?
no, ma'am, I do not. I just know it had to be a long time ago if it was 2 cents a quart.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Vice Chair. Any other questions? All right, thank you, sir. We really
Thank
appreciate
you for your time.
Thank you for being here. And on this break, I did want to say thank you to our outgoing Vice Chair, Senator Rita Parks. She has been a delight to work with, and I know she's going on to other important things as well, but she's done a really great job as Vice Chairman of this committee this year, so thank you, Senator Parks, for your help. And to Ian Jones, our very capable and able committee staff attorney, and Ms. Brittany Riding, our liaison with the Lieutenant Governor's Office. These have all done yeoman's work. We really appreciate it. Senator Branning, if you want to introduce our next.
Sure, we'll run to the next speaker on the list, the Railroad Association, Mr. Joel Yelverton, and I believe you've got Mr. Michael Garriga with you, and so just go in whatever order you deem necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My part will be brief, mainly introductions. On behalf of the 5 Class 1s and 21 short line railroads that operate in the state, from everywhere from Tishomingo County to Hancock County, from DeSoto County to Jackson County, from Columbus to Natchez, Meridian to Vicksburg to Greenville. We're everywhere, every corner of the state, literally. Today we have several folks I'd like to just briefly call out. Robert Dexter with Yellow Creek up in Tishomingo County. There he is. And he also has a port and a railroad. We have Robert Maxwell next to him. That's Port of Rosedale and also the Great River Railroad. Stephen Lindsay Simmons representing, there they are back here, representing Mississippi Export. Steve Browning, he's around. He represents CN. Reed Branson representing KCS. And I will introduce the last guest here today. Again, we do very much appreciate this time to talk to you today and to tell a story. I think we have a great story to tell and some ideas, at least to ponder as you consider legislation. With me making the main presentation is Michael Garriga. Michael Garriga is a native Mississippian. We actually went to the same high school, a few years apart. But he now works for the BNS Railway. And so, Michael, you got this one, so come on and tell the folks. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate that introduction. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. As Joel said, my name is Michael Garriga. I'm the Executive Director for Public Affairs with BNSF Railway. We're based in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a Western railroad carrier, and we operate 32,000 track miles in 28 states and 2 Canadian provinces. I also currently serve as a chairman of the Mississippi Railroad Association. And as Joel said, as I always have to say this when I'm in my home state, as I currently reside in Memphis, I certainly have to note to the committee that, as he said, I'm a native Mississippian and spent the first 38 years of my life in Mississippi, and it'll always be home to me. So. As you probably well know, Mississippi has a very robust rail network with 5 of the nation's 7 Class 1 railroads and 21 short line railroads operating in the state. There are over 2,500 track miles. I believe Joel passed out a handout from the Association of American Railroads that kind of gives you an idea of where the trackage in the state runs. We have over 2,500 track miles in Mississippi, and we serve businesses, as Joel mentioned, crossing all over the state. We serve industries like Tri-State Lumber in Fulton, Servistall in Columbus, Toyota in Blue Springs, Nissan in Canton. I think our friends at MDA would tell you that without a strong partnership with the rail industry in Mississippi, manufacturing projects like Yokohama Tire and West Point and Continental Tire and Clinton and Viva and Loosedale would not happen. I can't express enough to tell you how privileged and excited I am here today to represent our industry, because we finally have an opportunity to convey our message. I think everyone on this committee has heard our message over time about the rail industry and some of the issues we have and some of the concerns we have, but I don't think we've had an opportunity to come to you as a body in a forum like this. So the timing couldn't be any better, and I'm really, really excited to have a conversation with you today about some of the thoughts and ideas that we have. If the legislature and the Senate and this committee are really serious about protecting and improving the state's transportation system with the current financial resources and without increasing the user fee or the fuel taxes, and I know that's a point of contention every year when we talk about infrastructure and infrastructure improvements, well, boy, do I have a deal for you. The rail industry, we offer two immediate and simple solutions. Really won't cost you much. Number one, promote policies that encourage the movement of commercial freight off of your highway system onto other modes of surface transportation. And by surface transportation, I mean railroads. I'm speaking of rail. Number two, I really want to say this loudly. Folks everywhere in the room can hear me. Stop allowing heavier trucks on your roads and highways. Simple. And I want to be clear in that message today. The rail industry is not against our friends in the commercial trucking industry. They are our partners. I don't want my comments to be construed as disparaging against commercial trucking. While trucking is certainly a competitor to rail, they play an important and integral role in freight rail movement and are business partners in the rail's intermodal freight business, which also happens to be the largest growing sector of our industry. To that point, J.B. Hunt, one of the nation's largest trucking companies, is BNSF Railway's largest customer. We're not against big trucks. We're not against commercial trucking. We're against allowing bigger trucks onto your highways without a correlating fee structure that accounts for the damage on the roads and bridges that they cause. Since 2006, the rail industry has invested in excess of $330 billion of its own private dollars in its own privately owned, privately maintained rail network. The commercial trucking industry has the benefit of using the public highway system to move their freight. And yes, they pay a user fee in the form of a fuel tax for their use of the system. That's how they pay for the infrastructure in which they use to move their freight. But when heavier trucks than the allowed tolerance operate on the public highway system without a correlating increase in user or permit fees, it is our view that the industry, that that's a subsidy for transporting freight, and it places the rail industry and the rates in which it can charge at an economic disadvantage. We feel that we should all seek a fair and equitable transportation system where the public bodies are not choosing winners and losers or creating an economic environment which favors one transportation mode over another mode of transportation. We simply ask for one thing in this debate: modal equity. While commercial trucking is an essential part of American commerce, we don't have to go any further, it's essential. But for whatever reason, states, both individually, collectively, often choose to ignore the damages the trucks do to highways. And it may not be an intent to ignore it. It may just be one of those things where it just is what it is, and we choose to not debate it or discuss it. But nonetheless, there are two inescapable facts. Beyond the forces of nature, trucks are responsible for nearly all the damage to highways and bridges. Passenger vehicles are largely irrelevant, and the fuel taxes that both the federal and state level, as everyone well knows, paid by motor carriers, does not offset the damages trucks impose, nor do they come close to doing so. Depending on the pavement type, quality, one single and typical tractor trailer can do as much damage to a roadway surface as 10,000 passenger vehicles. I do have citations for all the statistics I'm going to provide the committee so you don't think I'm just making this stuff up. The current fuel taxes and other fees that heavy trucks pay don't come close to covering the cost of the damage. In fact, the taxes and fees The commercial trucks paid to help maintain our nation's roads and bridges have not been substantially changed since 1993, and in this state, I believe 1987. That results in a multi-billion-dollar annual underpayment versus the damage they cause. These huge underpayments mean that repairing most of the damage heavy trucks cause is paid for by the general public, not the trucking industry. Since 2008, the Highway Trust Fund has received more than $143 billion in funding from the U.S. Treasury's general fund. As a traditional source of highway funding, as traditional sources of highway funding have and will continue to erode, states will find it increasingly difficult to undervalue the roadway damage attributable to trucks. As it pertains to Mississippi, and I'm happy to go into the statistics, I think we all know where the deficiencies are with our bridges and roads. If it pleases the chairman, Madam Chair, I'll go into this if that's okay. I think we all know, but a total of 54% of Mississippi's major roads are in poor, mediocre condition, and I get this information from the Road Information Program, or TRIP 2020. Driving on deteriorated roads costs Mississippi motorists $1.63 billion a year, $794 per motorist, in the form of additional repairs, accelerated vehicle depreciation, wear and tear, same source. 17,019 bridges in Mississippi. There are 6,337 that are in fair poor condition. Total of 3,127 of Mississippi's bridges are weight restricted. I could go on and on. I think everybody knows that recurring theme. I think we've all heard it before. So what's the answer? New equitable user fee systems that are not a burden to the general public must be considered. Vehicle miles travel taxes or weight distant mile taxes can be considered as opposed to the outdated excise tax on the per gallon consumption that we're accustomed to paying. Vehicles are far more fuel efficient than they were in 1987 or 1993. The revenue just isn't sufficient to maintain current inventories, much less expand highway capacity for freight movement. As part of the comments that I have today and part of the information I'm going to provide to the committee, I've provided a study that was conducted by Mark Burton. He's from the Department of Transportation Economics at the University of Tennessee. It's called The Long Run Highway Funding Needs and Alternatives in Virginia, the potential role of a weight distance tax. It offers some pretty insightful information on the ongoing highway funding dilemmas in Virginia. I think it's pretty relative to just about every state in the union. And it may be something that this committee wants to consider in the future, maybe having some kind of a study or analysis of that type of fee structure considered by the legislature. But moving on to the subject of rail truck diversion, that's something I want to talk as well, because as I said in my opening statement, we need to encourage the movement of freight from highway to rail if we're going to ever address this dilemma seriously. A study used decades of actual truck and rail pricing data and demand data, including data as recent as 2019, to estimate the shipper and carrier response to various truck size and weight scenarios over a period of 5 years. The study estimates these impacts for both intermodal and carload freight rail traffic. The study evaluated the diversion impacts of 6 different truck configurations. The study did not attempt to estimate the likely increase in operating costs and capital costs for rail, but the diversion volumes vary significantly by truck configuration. For example, an increase in allowed total gross truck weights from 80,000 to 91,000 pounds is estimated to result in the diversion of 2.6 million annual railroad carloads and 1.8 million intermodal units from rail to truck. You elevate and increase the weight on truck, obviously more freight is going to go to truck and divert from rail. Alternatively, an increase of trucks to 120,000 pounds, hope nobody gets any ideas on that, combined with a twin 33-foot trailer leads to a predicted version of 7.5 million annual rail carloads, 8.5 million diverted intermodal shipments. This clearly illustrates the point of increasing truck weights divert frail movement, as I said, from rail to highway. 2 final points I would like to make today. As I mentioned earlier, you have 5 of the nation's 7 Class I railroads operating in Mississippi. Can't tell you that's a huge asset for economic development in this state. But you also have 21 short line railroads operating in the state, as we like to call our short line partners. We work directly with them to move freight as last mile movements. Since it was created in 2012, The legislature has invested over $17 million in the Mississippi Railroad Improvement Fund, and we hope you continue to invest in that fund. It's a very tremendous benefit to our short line partners. That program is administered by MDA and provides grants to our short line partners for upgrades to their track, and it keeps those short lines viable. Why do we need to keep those short lines viable? Without it, short line railroads may not be sustainable. And your rural areas in Mississippi would be without access to the national freight rail network, eliminating opportunities for economic development. So I have to ask this question: if the legislature is allocating public funds and investing in its short line rail network, which we think is a very valuable investment, and you're protecting rural economic opportunities, short and long term, what sense does it make to increase weights on trucks, making it easier and cheaper to haul freight by highway, then putting those short lines at an economic disadvantage and a higher risk of unsustainability? You just got to ask that question. Without customers on those rail systems, if they're moving all their freight to highway freight transport, you have no customers. Without those customers, there are no short line rail systems. There is no short line rail network in Mississippi. You've lost your last mile access. You've lost your access to rural rail in Mississippi, and no access to rail in economically challenged areas. So that's something I hope you'd consider. Finally, last topic I was going to mention, I want to talk a little bit about harvest permits. The rail industry has no objection to the harvest permits, or takes no exception to the harvest permits. When the harvest permits were introduced, we think in the 40s, many, many decades ago, the original intent was great, pure. I mean, it was a huge benefit to the ag industry, which goes without saying. It's an obvious, important segment of the economy in this state, and the significance of the ag industry, it cannot be stated enough. But as everyone knows, harvest permit is a means for allowing farmers to get their harvest from the field to the processing points with a tolerance, because in the beginning they had no access to scales. They don't have access to scales, and that's reasonable. The truck driver who's moving those shipments, they don't have. They're not the ones responsible for loading them, so they get a tolerance, and that's fine. I think that's good policy. However, over time, the harvest permit in Mississippi has been expanded by this body to allow the movement of other, what I like to call inorganic commodities, such as sand and gravel and wood chips and wood pellets and fill dirt, at an 84,000-pound weight limit for an annual fee of $25. Allowing the expansion of the harvest permit for these inorganic commodities continues to put rail at an economic disadvantage, especially your short lines. So I hope ending the expansion to inorganic commodities of the harvest permit is something that will be greatly considered by this body and this community in the future. In closing, let me reiterate, instead of seeking policies that incentivize more freight movement from rail to highway, I think the solution to your challenges that you're having would be to seek a way to move more freight from highway to rail. By increasing truck size, you're disincentivizing the latter. I want you to think about this. A single intermodal freight train takes the place of up to 240 trucks off the National Highway Network. Think about every single freight train, 240 intermodal cars, rail system, very capable of moving that. But if you don't have a sustainable rail system, that all goes back to the highway, enhancing the burden that you have. And let me finally say, as I mentioned earlier, all the information I presented today, I do have citations, and I'm going to provide all the documents, the study I mentioned earlier, to the committee for your review and for your benefit. And again, I can't tell you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, I guess we had dual chairmen, is that appropriate? I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. It really has been an honor and a privilege, and always good to be home in Mississippi. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have today.
Questions? Anyone? Younger.
I think the biggest problem we have is we're not maintaining our highways. I mean, they're going to tear up whether you have heavy loads on it or not. It's, it's just like getting your vehicle serviced. And, as far as harvesting, I mean, how's the farmer going to get his product to the rail line?
That's a good question. And there are commodities that we don't compete with. And I think that's a very fair question. I hope I prepared properly for it. I anticipate getting that. There are instances and situations where truck is the only means of transporting that commodity or that good to the market or to the marketplace because there's no rail access. There's a few things to look at. One, you can encourage what we call transload facilities. You can make, I think I'm saying this correctly, the Mississippi DOT has an intermodal or multimodal fund where investments can be made into transload facilities to get some of those commodities that aren't currently rail served or shipped by rail onto rail. So there's not a direct competition, but there is an indirect competition. And I hope I get through this correctly and don't fumble it. There could be a perception of an indirect subsidy. As more and more trucks are heavier, it puts rail at an economic disadvantage because there's a baseline for surface and pavement. You have a certain lasting lifespan for that pavement, and if you put heavier trucks on it, it's going to deteriorate faster and faster and faster, causing that maintenance and the maintenance cost to increase at a higher and faster rapid rate. So we feel like even if there's non-competing commodities that are heavier that are being placed on the highways, there's a faster infusion of public funds going into paying for that network. Conversely, with the rail, we're paying privately to maintain our network. So they're getting that government assistance, that subsidy back into the highway system because there may be another commodity down the road that we do compete directly with, and they're getting an advantage, and their rates can reflect that because they're not having to pay additional costs to maintain that surface. I hope I communicated that correctly.
I'm all for the railroads too.
I know you are.
Because
Always have been.
that'll
Appreciate
help
that.
get traffic off the highways, but we're at a disadvantage too when the other states around us are allowed to haul heavier loads. So we have to come up with something.
Sure, I understand, and we have conversations just like this in those other states, and we try to be as diligent as we can to make sure that the surrounding states don't implement similar policies because just like in anything, legislative that comes from this body, once it's passed, other states, if it's a good idea, the other states are going to follow and you're going to see dominoes. So I understand that point, and we've seen it in other states as well. So, and thank you for that question.
Senator Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you said that the per gallon fuel tax was outdated. Were you referring to Mississippi or were you referring across the country?
I think you can say that across the country, and maybe outdated isn't the correct word, but it's obviously not paying. It's not paying for the maintenance and the expansion of the public highway network in this country and in this state. It hasn't been paying for itself for many years. So maybe outdated isn't the right word. Maybe just not enough. And I'm not saying, and I'm not advocating or not advocating for a fuel tax increase in this state. I'm just saying there are other alternatives to the fuel tax that might be a better reflection of meeting revenue adequacy for the movement of freight and the movement of transportation in this state and in this country. And that's why I mentioned the vehicle miles traveled tax and the weight distance tax. Again, I'm going to provide you with that study, and I hope it's something that the committee will consider. And again, it pertains to Virginia, but I think it could pertain to any state. I would suggest maybe contacting this gentleman that conducted that study from the University of Tennessee and maybe having look at Mississippi in the same light.
Senator Blackman, others? All right, Mr. Garriga, thank you so much. We really appreciate you and Mr. Yelverton coming today.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it, and good seeing all of you again.
Okay, next we've got the Ports Council, Mr. Dexter and Mr. Maxwell.
Well, thank y'all for having us here today. I'm Robert Dexter. I'm the Executive Director of Yellow Creek Port up in Iuka, Mississippi, and Robert Maxwell is the Port Director for Rosedale over in Bolivar County. So we're here on behalf of the Mississippi Ports Council. And today we don't have an agenda, but we want to give you some information on ports. We know you're talking about highway and transportation, and you've heard from the railroads. We want to give you a lot of information about ports. Ports plays a major part in the national transportation system. And over the last several years, utilizations of ports have been on the increase. In 2018, almost 1.9 billion tons of cargo was moved in the top 25 ports. And to a feather in our cap, everybody in this room, we have one of those ports in Mississippi. So what does that do? That reduces the stress off the highways. Give you a good visual here. He was talking about how many trucks it takes off the roads. For us to look at this, if you look at one barge moved on the waterway takes less fuel, but it also takes 70 semi-trucks off the roads. I'm in Tishomingo County at the very tip of Mississippi, up in the top. About every 24 hours on the rural highways in Mississippi, about 4,752 trucks, commercial trucks are moving. Just in Tishomingo County, if I had a little more equipment and a few upgrades to my port, I could take 300 trucks a week off the rural roads in Tishomingo County. So what about our region here? What we do, as you see the rivers, Mississippi River, Tennessee River, Intercoastal Waterway, and Ohio, that takes about 49 million round-trip trucks off the road, okay? So you relate that to, if we did not exist, that would increase truck traffic up to about 31%. And who are we? So Mississippi Ports, everybody in this room is represented by Mississippi Ports. We've got them on the Mississippi River, we've got the deep water ports, and we've got them on the Tenn-Tom Waterway. Right now, we're in the top 20, we're either 19 or 20 on moving cargo by water. For example, Yellow Creek Port in Tishomingo County, you know where we are. We're at the confluence of the Tennessee River and the Tenn-Tom Waterway. Our tonnage growth went up 19% from 2018 to 2019. Also, our revenue growth was 5%. So what does that mean? We generate our own money. So we generate our own money and we reinvest it in our ports. Pascagoula's had 4% growth over the last 4 years, and they're moving about 28 million tons. And we can say that about every port down the Mississippi and down the Tombigbee and the deep waters. Robert's going to talk to you about some of the products that we're moving on the water.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for having us. And I got a little Delta crud going on here, so I apologize. Hopefully you can hear me. Just like Robert and Michael were both saying, I mean, the freight transportation in the state is highly important to the industry and the economic development of the state. The ports all along the state, on the Gulf, in the Gulf, and all along the Mississippi River and Tenn-Tom Waterway, we handle all sort of export items and import goods as well. A lot of agricultural items and products and commodities, from forest products to even to wood pellets and chips and other things that you can see here. But because of that, we're a vital economic engine, particularly to our each individual region that we represent. Even the smaller ports in the state, they can be one of the largest economic development drivers for that region. And so each individual port is highly important to their region, regardless of the size, compared to other ports in the state or in the nation. We export a tremendous amount of goods and commodities to the rest of the world, to other areas of the country as well. Bring in a lot of raw products for further processing for manufacturers here, such as the tire manufacturers and other similar to that. But that being said, ports historically are highly underfunded, and what this shows here is the amount of funding on highways and airports and rail, and you can see ports, federal. This chart is federal funding, but if you'll notice that everybody else is in the billions of dollars, and ports are down in the millions. And actually, of that 225 million, which is the Port Infrastructure Development program that is only a couple of years old, of that, only about 25 million of that is utilized for inland ports. And it's, you know, it finally gives us some opportunity, but it's you know, not enough at all. You know, we've had to compete against other modes of transportation for years for funding, and through different changes in legislature and the way things are done, it just makes it very difficult. There are new grants available, such as infra grants and build grants, but they're highly, highly competitive. And like I said, a lot of it's based on tonnage, based on revenue. It's based on a lot of different things that you're competing with. You know, say we may be competing with the Port of Long Beach in California or somewhere like that, and we don't really have much to compete there. But it's still highly, highly important, and I feel like the return on the investment to a smaller area, facility like that would be much greater without spending quite the amount of money up front as well. And then we also have other funds that have been underutilized for maintaining ports and the development of that, such as the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which is something that the Gulf Coast ports can take advantage of to help deepen for international cargo and things like that. In the past, it has not been utilized the way it should have been. The money just hadn't been being spent. It's starting to be spent a little more now, but and then there's also the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. But unfortunately for us, and where we are in Mississippi and on our section of the Mississippi River, that a lot of that money is actually spent more for locks and dams and that type of thing. And we're lucky enough on the Mississippi, the lower Mississippi, where we are, we don't have that concern for locks and dams. We don't have delays. Our only delays in transportation are during extreme low water periods, which we're in one now, but we've actually got a little bit of relief in the last few days, and the rivers come up some. But a lot of that Inland Waterway Trust Fund money is used for the dredging in the main channel to keep it open and to keep the barges loaded to a full capacity in order to increase the efficiency of the transportation. Because actually the less you can load on the barge, the more barges it takes, obviously the more money it takes to move the same amount of product. So the more we can keep the barges loaded to their full capacity, the better off we are. And same as same as Michael was saying, increasing the utilization of other modes of transportation can lengthen the lifespan of the roads and bridges and that type of thing in the state, which is something that we're always definitely for. Being said that the ports are underfunded, we do have something in the state of Mississippi that we are very proud of and appreciative, and really appreciate all your support in it, and it's the Multimodal Transportation Improvement Program that is operated through MDOT. Ports receive 38% of that fund every year, and I believe the way it was developed is because of the fact that we have so few other options for additional funding as the reason we get that. So as the way it is, it's about $10 million annually currently. Any improvement to that would be greatly appreciated, but we have, as it is now, about $3.8 million that is able to be split between 15 ports on an annual basis. I think the majority of us could probably spend the full $10 million on pretty easily. The only thing though is that with the proper amount of funding, port infrastructure projects, anything that you're going to do on the water or near the water, they can be fairly costly. But for the most part, the residuals on a lot of those projects are long-lasting because there's not a lot of annual maintenance and that type of cost compared to railroads and waterways, even though we're You know, a lot of us, the majority of the ports have rail access, which is the most logical step down between ports and highways. So there's also just created by the Mississippi Ports Council in the last year, I believe it was, the Ports Improvement Fund, which is based on the Mississippi Railroad Improvement Fund that's operated through MDA, and as a way to hopefully to introduce maybe some bond money or some additional funds that could be available to ports for certain large infrastructure projects that might be another long-lasting bonus to the state. So, and I'll let Robert finish up.
So we say all that to tell you that, you know, ports, we support state and local economies. We employ hundreds of jobs. We deliver Mississippi products to the world, and we also get raw materials to our industrial clients that are in our ports. Any investment you make in the ports is going to have a positive rate of return, and usually our investments are a one-time investment, like Robert said. We get a one-time investment, and it lasts us 5 to 10 years. Ports improvement is going to help drive the economics of the state of Mississippi. So with that, we appreciate you taking the time to hear what we can do. We know our Mississippi Ports Council is new, but any support you can give us, we would appreciate it, and we want to take any questions you may have for us.
Thank you so much, both. Questions? Members, that was really interesting. Thank you for bringing the slides. That was very helpful. Any questions? I know Senator Parks has been a big proponent of ports, as her part of the state has some of that activity, and so she's been a big cheerleader for you guys, so you can thank her for that. Senator Younger.
Yes, do the privately owned ports, can they receive the same amount of help from government funding as the government-owned ports? You know what I'm saying? I've got a good friend of mine that works for a privately owned port on the Tin-Tom. Mm-hmm. Well, my local Lowndes County port just received a big crane up there that was worth, I forgot how much money, it was a lot of money.
About $1.5 million for that crane.
There you go.
But that crane's going to last about 20 years. That's the kind of money we're talking, so.
Can a privately owned port get help like that, though?
And they apply, you're talking about apply for the MDOT money?
The crane, the crane I think that you're talking about, I think was maybe through a bill grant or infra, and I think there is a way to do it. I'm not 100% certain about it, but I'm going to say they have to be, it would improve their opportunity if they were partnered with a public.
Partner with the county, partner with their county or their city maybe.
Yeah.
Could maybe go that away, but it's mostly for the, the public ports.
Okay, other questions? Gentlemen, thank you both. We very much appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Mr. Ryan Lindsay with CRH Americas Materials.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am excited to be in Mississippi this afternoon. So I appreciate you letting a Texan in today. That was kind. I fully expected to get stopped down at security, but I appreciate, we're happy when people invite us anywhere, so thank you. My name is Ryan Lindsay. I'm Vice President of Government Relations for CRH Americas Materials. We're the largest construction material supplier in the world now. So think about stone and cement and ready mix and hot mix. You know us here in Mississippi as APAC. We started here in 1956. First project was the Columbus Airfield project. We have 400 employees now, but we touch thousands in the state of Mississippi that we do business with on a daily basis. So thrilled to be here. Love to talk about roads. Not going to talk about fuel tax, so everybody will be excited to hear that. But love to talk about roads, so I appreciate the opportunity. When I was asked to do this, I was thrilled, so thank you again. And I thought, what am I going to talk about? I want to be different, right? We hear the same information over and over. And so if it's okay with you, I'm going to tell a story. And this has a benefit of also being a true story. So that's even better, right, since I'm giving testimony in this committee. I was 11 years old, and the Chicago Bulls drafted a guy from North Carolina that turned into a pretty good player, right? I mean, nobody thought he would. He kind of he got hurt when he's a rookie, right? But he ends up being pretty decent, you know? So Nike thought it'd be a great idea if they gave him his own shoe, right? So the Air Jordan comes out. I'm a hoops guy, was a hoops guy, am a hoops guy, love it, right? Waco, Texas, I'm 11 years old. I talked my mother into taking me to the Richland Mall to the Foot Locker. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I begged for a pair of Air Jordans, right? And I had parachute pants and a sleeveless OP hoodie sweatshirt to wear with it, right? Some of you are smiling like you had the same one, right? Absolutely. I begged her for a pair of those shoes. My mom was a nurse. My dad's a ditch digger, okay? $64 for a pair of shoes. My mother said, Ryan, if you tell your dad that I paid $64 for a pair of shoes, I'll strangle you, right? Now, my mother is not a violent woman. She's a little bit mean, but she's not a violent woman. But I absolutely believed her when she said that, right? Now, fast forward, ironically, that was 1987 was the last year that Mississippi raised the fuel tax, okay? And I said I wasn't going to talk about fuel tax. I lied. Apologize. It fits into the story, Mr. Chairman. I have a 12-year-old now. Fast forward. My man wants some Jordans, right? He really wants Yeezys, but that doesn't fit the story. So he wants Jordans. If I take $64 to that same Foot Locker in Waco, Texas to buy him a pair of Jordans, they're going to laugh me out of the building. You can't get a pair of brand Jordan socks for less than $30, right? So thank you for indulging me in the story, but that's what we're talking about here. If it's Jordans, if it's roads, we're talking about building roads in Mississippi, maintaining roads in Mississippi on $1987. We can't buy Jordans today on $1987. We can't maintain roads. So what is our issue? Senator Younger, our issue is maintenance. Plain and simple, our issue is maintenance, period. Some people in the audience may cringe when I say this, but you invited me and I got the microphone, so I'm up here, right? You can't make me sit down yet. We have a maintenance problem. We love ports. We love rail. We use both. Neither one are as useful to this state as they should be without a proper roadway system. We have a maintenance problem. So, how do we get past that, right? What do? We know the American Society of Civil Engineers rated Mississippi roads, gave us a D+. A D+. Now, that same lady that bought me those shoes in 1987, I tried to convince her much later in life that a D was actually a good grade, or D stood for diploma, or I used some sort of language like that when I was in college. She didn't buy it, right? What does D mean? D is poor. It's substandard. Bottom line is, we've done a bad job of maintaining a big investment that this state made. And absolutely, for the betterment of all taxpayers now and in the future and for our economy, that obviously has to change. So, we have a resource issue, we have a maintenance issue. We know the benefits of a good road system. We've had people up here testifying already today talking about economic impact, and the feds will tell you that you spend $1 billion, you create 13,000 jobs. We know if you spend a dollar on infrastructure construction, it also leads to $1.80 or $2.50, depending on what part of the country you're in, and other construction, right? We have a real example in Mississippi, south of Memphis, where Highway 269. You build Highway 269, the area is blown up. Is it distribution? Is it industry? Whatever it is, we know that infrastructure spurs that development. So we know there's a return. Now, consequently, what does a poor system lead to? We had somebody testify earlier, a trip report, that Mississippi drivers are going to spend $1.8 billion this year, $1.8 billion on vehicle damage caused by poor roads. It's like $700 a piece is what I think I heard him say. So we know that's a tangible number, right? What we don't know is the cost of not doing something. So I would pitch that to you. What is the cost of not doing something? What is the cost of not raising revenue and not maintaining our roads? We obviously know it's like a board on your house. If you don't paint it, right, it's going to deteriorate, and the repair is going to be much worse than it would have been if you maintain it going forward. But how many jobs are we costing ourselves? How much economic development opportunity are we costing ourselves by not doing something? And that's absolutely a question we need to look at. So where do we go from here, right? How do we move forward? Again, I'm not going to talk about fuel tax, but that's the mechanism we have, right? So if we don't like it and we're not going to move it, then let's change it. Let's look at alternatives. And that was a challenge today. So one of the benefits, we're in 47 states. I get to be a lot of different places. As a matter of fact, my wife sends her regards. Thank you. She wanted me to thank you for inviting me because she's tired of looking at me being at home on the back porch during COVID. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation from Jennifer Lindsay. She appreciates it. We see a little bit of everything. I want to commend you for what you've done on electric vehicle fees. That's a big deal. A lot of states have not taken that step. Now, we love electric vehicles, right? Love them. Probably going to own one at some point, right? We all may. But they got to pay their fair share. It's not right to get a pass, right, when everybody else is paying. So what you've done on EV fees, what you did with the lottery, commend you for that. That's been big for us and our employees this year and for the economy. So thank you for that. Also commend you on the internet sales tax. Those have begun to bridge a gap. If we're looking at a $300 million deficit or a maintenance deficit, I'll call it, we start putting these pieces together to bridge the gap. I do like what the first gentleman said. We do need to look at this as a portfolio. Right? We hedge ourselves in one area. We do have to look at a number of things. There's no silver bullet. So we challenge you to do that. Some things we've seen in other states, some neighbor states. Alabama, obviously they raise a user fee. They're glad they did now, right? Since we didn't know what was coming 7 months ago. They're glad they did. Tennessee, they raise a user fee. They do a swap, right? Governor Haslam eliminated a level of income tax, I believe, and they work in a swap. In Texas, we did not raise a fuel tax. One of the very similar situations in a political challenge, we acknowledge that's a tough thing. So we went to a severance tax, some oil and gas, and we diverted money away from the rainy day fund. We also went to a sales tax where when the sales tax hits X, everything to Y goes directly to the highway funds. That's indexed by nature. The economy does better, sales tax numbers go up, and those dollars move. Michigan, whether you like it or not, the Pot for Potholes program is beginning to gain some traction. The point to all of that is we have to look at a variety of items to be able to fill this hole. I will call your attention to something that Arkansas did, and some of you may be familiar with that. We were directly involved in this initiative. Arkansas in 2013 passed a half-cent sales tax. Generates about $200 million a year, all for roads. And there was a state, county, and city split kind of component to that, right? It's sunset. They had some challenges. One of the ways to sell it was a sunset. Okay, so it was set to sunset in 2023. The economic impact from that is said to be $800 million a year, creates 3,600 jobs annually just from that half-cent sales tax component. It was all dedicated to roads. It was actually, they came out with a list initially and identified the projects that it was going to go to, right? So goods and bads about that, but that's what they did. We've heard that before, right? That's what they did. So 2019, they decide we're coming up on sunset. We want to do a couple of other things. So the first bill Governor Hutchinson signs they put an EV fee in. It was $95 million total. It was an EV fee. It was some casino revenues. It was a user fee increase with fuel tax. Well, you've already done two of those. You've done EV and you've done a lottery component, right? That was $95 million. The next bill sent to the ballot, which passed 2 days ago by 65%, was to make that half-cent sales tax permanent going forward. So Arkansas has done that. The purpose of that story is to challenge you to get outside of the box, and that's where we need to be. I will also add the federal component. My confidence in the legislative process in Washington, D.C. is at an all-time low, I will admit to you. But here's what I do believe is going to happen. Regardless of how the election turns out, regardless of what happens, infrastructure is going to be a part of a recovery conversation. Bottom line. That's the way we put people back to work. That's the way we increase GDP. We're going to build our way out in a lot of parts of the country. So regardless of when that happens and how it comes, there's a couple of bills that came out last year. On the Senate side, EP&W committee passed a bill out. Just the highway spend was a 42% increase over current levels. Now, it never went to the floor, right? It only went out of committee. The House counterpart to that went all the way through the House. Voted out of committee, went all the way through. It was a 28% increase. So the point of that is there's dollars coming. They're going to be here. We need to make sure we're ready from a match standpoint. We need to have everything in line so that we can take advantage of that. So in summary, again, I'll thank you for the opportunity to be here. Very much appreciate it. I'll encourage you again, put all options on the table. We want to be a resource. We want to be part of the solution. Everybody comes in and brings you problems. We want to be part of the solution. So we'll be a resource whenever you need that. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, would love to help with that. We also commit to you, APAC will work with you going forward, and we stand ready to put people to work as these dollars come through the system. So with that, I yield back. I've always wanted to say that, so I appreciate you letting me say that.
Thank you very much for being here. Actually, could you expound a little more on the pot for potholes that you were talking about from one of the other states?
So there's a number, as that becomes more popular, as we all know, right? There's a number of initiatives underway. Michigan, Governor Whitmer was one of the first people to bring the idea up, just to take a portion of that, you tax it and take a portion of that revenue and dedicate it to something, right? It's about $35 million a year was what they were talking about, just the maintenance, you know? So again, it's out of the box, man. You know, we got to get out of the box.
And can you tell us your thoughts on the infrastructure package that might be coming from the federal government on those different bills you've seen so far? What is the match rate that they've suggested for the states?
Well, so that's interesting. The Senate version was pretty consistent, and you have MDOT coming tomorrow, and they're probably a better resource for that, honestly. But the House version had no federal match in the first year, I believe. And that was just another way to aid, give some state and local aid, make state and local aid available. I think we'll probably be, if it's zero or less than it is, it'll very quickly get to no less than the current match that we have, right? That's what I would anticipate. But again, that's a moving target, as you know.
All right, Senator Delano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my comment is to you and the Madam Chair. You know, people from the districts that are adjoining casinos are very familiar with the phrase that all roads lead to casinos. I think we can also say that all roads lead to pot dispensaries. So we need to talk to the Department of Health about helping us maintain pathways to our pot dispensaries.
I agree. And I know with the constitutional language, it may be a little more difficult, but I think we have some good friends at appropriations and good minds that can help figure that out, perhaps. All right, other questions? These have been some good ones so far. Anybody? Good. All right, thank you so very much for being here. We really appreciate you.
Okay, up next we have the supervisors.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Thank you to the committee for letting me come and speak on behalf of the 82 member counties of our association. I'm Derek Surratt, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Association of Supervisors. Again, thank you for the opportunity. You know, I always never putting me last on the agenda. I figured out why that's so, is to keep the crowd here, right? Thank you. Let me just start out by just reminding everybody, I'm sure everybody knows that counties have 52,000 road miles that we maintain and almost 10,000 bridges, 9,865 bridges. So the majority of the roads in the state and the majority of the bridges are maintained by county governments. And there's different sources of revenue. Some the state helps us with through the local system bridge program. That helps us some with that. Approximately 23 1/4% of the fuel tax comes back to counties to help us. And then the rest of it is maintained through property taxes. So when we're here today talking about what do we need to do, and I heard the previous speakers before me, it is always good to go last because you can hear what everyone else says. I heard so many people talk about what do we need to do and what's the cost of not doing anything. And the thing that I heard the previous speaker talk about was that what other states have done, and we as an association of supervisors are certainly watching that. And one thing that we notice is a continuous source of revenue. And that's what I want to drive home today, is that we've got to find some continuous source of revenue because other states are doing that. And it's just a simple fact in life that we're in a competitive world. Alabama's not too far from us. They border us. They have done an additional source of revenue. We mentioned earlier, Senator Younger mentioned that weight limits are higher in certain states. Our supervisors across the state hear that. We hear it from farmers and loggers. Matter of fact, many of our supervisors are farmers and work in the forestry industry. We hear it from businesses and industry. We know that it's impacting our economic development and opportunities. However, what's the answer to that? Those other states that have higher weight limits, they have a higher revenue source that's continuous. So they have more money that they can put into the system, build bigger, stronger, and better bridges and infrastructure, and you're able to run bigger, better, and stronger economic development, jobs, tourism. So the two have to match. You can't have one without the other. So we do have to find a continuous source. I don't have the magic answer for you. I will tell you that when we're talking about what have we done back in 2018, which is coming up and time flies, we did the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund in a special session. Y'all did that for us and for our state and for our taxpayers. And $250 million was put into the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund. Mississippi Department of Transportation handled that. There was an advisory board set up. I think that program has worked very well. Yes, it has been a little slower than we would all like, but when you do that many projects that quick, and we had over $1 billion in need that was submitted through that project, but only $250 million was the cap. But counties and cities and Mississippi Department of Transportation had over $1 billion in need. That was in 2018. What's our need today? Infrastructure is steadily declining and deteriorating. As we stand here today, we've got heavy loads and traffic going over roads and bridges, and it's deteriorating. It's wearing them out. So we have to constantly be updating them. So I say this, that program was good. I could easily say, and I think all of my 82 counties members would agree, let's do it again. Interest rates are low. We've got a system set up through the Mississippi Department of Transportation. You got an advisory board that's still working. We've got a meeting on November the 18th. All these groups are getting updates from MDOT. We're talking back to our counties and cities, making sure they're staying on target. That is something we can do, but it has to be continuous. We can't do it and then wait 3 or 4 years and do it again when there's a greater need than what you provide in revenue. So we have to have something that continues. And building these infrastructure projects is not something that you can push out $1 billion in 1 year and get it all done. I want to make that point clear. That's why continuous is so important. It's important that we don't push out too much money, have too many projects, and then you got to buy right away. You got to move utilities. Moving utilities today is much more complicated than it was 10 years ago. So that's important to us. Pretty much want to point out to you that the federal funding that we used to receive has pretty much dried up. The federal funding, it was always small, but now it all goes to these inspections that the federal government is requiring, and they're very, very complex inspections, and they're a lot more detailed than they used to be. So an inspector can shut down a bridge and close it a lot quicker today than they could have even 5 years ago. They go up under the bridge, they drill into it, and y'all may have had a speaker today that talked a little bit more about that, but if that pillar that's holding up the bridge column has any type of, if it doesn't have enough resistance into that drill, and it shut the whole bridge down. So, and that was one reason we did the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund, and that was in 2018. But those inspections are still going on today, and bridges are still being shut down, so it's continuous. So continuous funding, continuous inspections, continuous shutdown of bridges, and roads are continuous deteriorating. So with that, that pretty much wraps up what I've got to offer in terms of a report from us. Again, I don't have any magic bullet other than we got to do something. It's got to be continuous.
Thank you, Mr. Surratt. Can you tell us a little bit of an update on the monies that have been received since 2018 on the internet sales tax diversions, the lottery? Because I just see actually a lot of activity going on in many of the counties that I represent. I assume that's the same all across the state. So
Yep.
obviously the need for more money is apparent and obvious, but it's also good to hear about what you're doing with the current dollars that have been provided. Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I did want to talk about use tax. That's so very important. What y'all did for counties and cities and the whole state on use tax is going to be very helpful. We're starting to receive the very first checks on that. We received the first check in January, the second check in July. It's only it's phased in. It's only 25% of what the allotment will be per county once it's completely phased in. So in January, it will move up to 50%. We have a link on our website that links you to the Department of Revenue for how much each county and each city has received so far. And it's on the front page of our website it's called County Infrastructure Forward, and it will show you how much the county and how much the city received in January and in July. And we're going to continue to keep that link, and that's the link directly to DOR. And so that's starting to build. However, it's small at this point. You know, most counties are around, their 25% check is around $86,000 to $120,000, you know, so you do see some projects going on. The projects you see mainly going around the state are through the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund. The projects you'll see in the use tax will be a couple years away. Just because things are so expensive to build. $120,000, as the speaker before me said, about the shoes and how much they cost. One thing to point out from that we are keeping up with is the Consumer Price Index, and this was several years ago, has increased 112% since 1987, since we had any type of change in our continuous funding. And construction cost has increased 143%. And with COVID, if y'all know, if you built anything lately or bought a board from Home Depot, you know it's gone up. So all of that is increased. But so the use tax will be there. It'll be there in the future, and it'll be a great continuous source. And we're proud of that. But competitive-wise, Alabama did percentage of their use tax in roads and bridges. Tennessee did too. Arkansas did too. We did as well. We stayed competitive there. But we have to be competitive when they raise their other continuous sources. We have to be competitive there. Lottery-wise, all of that goes to Mississippi Department of Transportation, which it all connects. As we said earlier, all roads lead to somewhere where all roads connect as well. So anyway, does that help answer your question a little bit?
It does. Other questions? Members? All right. You did an excellent job. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Surratt.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Sherry Veazey with MML.
Well, I can see from the excitement on your faces that you're glad I'm the last speaker.
No, it's
I
just
will
for
be
you.
brief.
It's just for you,
Oh,
Sherry.
is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a handout that I want to touch on, just to kind of give you some background. Some of this you already know and you've heard before. But there are 298 municipalities in our state, and 97% of them are current members of MML. Since I've been with the league in 2004, transportation infrastructure improvements and maintenance have been an ongoing conversation. And so we've tried to look at that data over the years. We did a study in 2012 where we just looked at what revenue streams cities had. And so I've got that outlined for you so you can see the kinds of revenue that they rely on. Street, water, and sewer maintenance is obviously one of the primary functions of municipal government, and I think, as Derek just said, it gets more and more expensive all the time to be able to maintain and make improvements. And many of our cities are under mandates from EPA to make very costly improvements that their rates don't support. Unlike the counties, we don't have as many road miles. We have about 23,000 street miles that cities have to be responsible for. We did a survey in 2018 that we had a 93% participation in, that we asked our cities to rate the condition of their roads as either poor or in bad condition, and then tell us what roads were in fair condition. And you can see that 52% of all of the roads, all of the cities said their roads were in poor condition. Another 24% were classified in fair condition. So, you know, there's a lot of challenges out there with street infrastructure for cities. And, you know, it's very expensive to mill and asphalt now. It gets more and more expensive every year. And just to kind of give you some demographics, 54% of our cities are under 2,000 in population. So they may not have as many streets, but they still have streets, and it's even more of a challenge for them to come up with funds for just basic street paving. A lot of our really small municipalities do have interlocal agreements with their counties, so their counties help them with that. But in a small town, you know, raising property taxes is not an option. Y'all don't like to raise taxes, and they don't either. And a mill in a very small town doesn't generate that much. So it's very difficult for them to come up with new revenue to pave roads. Sales tax diversion is obviously very important to cities. Municipalities receive 18.5% of sales tax collected in their boundaries, and about 76% of all sales tax that goes into the general fund comes from a municipality. I've given you the history of the sales tax diversion, and this is something that we've talked about over here for years. There have been various efforts in different bills over the years to increase that, but it was at one time 20.5%. Between 1979 and 1992, it was 20.5%. So we have always supported any effort to try to increase that. So on the following page, what I asked my staff to do is look at some of the cities you all represent and tell you what the current diversion is at 18.5%. And of course, we're asking for the moon here. You just went ahead and didn't phase it in or anything, just went ahead and went to 20.5%. You could see what an increase would be for these cities that we've just sampled here. And we can certainly pull that data together for all cities. But that would be a significant increase of revenue, and that does not involve raising anybody's taxes. It's just sending more of the diversion back to cities. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll echo what Derek just said, in 2018, we were very pleased with the use tax infrastructure bill that diverts use tax to cities now. That's been a great help, but it is being phased in, as Derek said. So we've got some of our small cities that are just having to kind of hold that money until they have enough to do something major with. But we do appreciate it, and it is an ongoing source. And from the numbers I've seen, use tax has gone up so much. So we're very appreciative of that percentage that we'll eventually get every year from use tax. The Emergency Road and Bridge Fund, we are members of, and although cities don't have as many bridges, we do have a few cities who were able to apply for some of that money, and I'll just echo what Derek said. That was a great program. It's worked well, and we certainly hope that you would consider refunding that with some more funds next year. As far as other options, the use tax, that is being phased in. They won't get their full amount until 2023. So one option might be to accelerate that phase in, and then they would have more money available to them to do something. Because the smaller ones are really having to sort of wait and see. Some of the bigger ones, that's a significant chunk of money, but of course the bigger cities have a lot more expensive infrastructure too. So The last thing I'll mention is the the Small Municipalities and Limited Population Grant Program. This is just one thing that helps our small towns. 85% of our cities are under 10,000, and this grant program is limited to cities under 10,000, I think counties under 30,000. But a lot of our small towns do use that for water, sewer improvements, and infrastructure. I know in the past we've had cities that have extended their water lines, and because of that, they were able to attract new industry. So it's a great economic development tool. If more money could be put in that, or if a similar program could be set up just for infrastructure, where cities could apply. This particular program does have a match. I think it's 10% for cities under 3,500. If you're over 3,500, I think it's 20%, but it doesn't have to be all cash. It can be some in-kind as well. So that program has worked very well, and that's just another example of, we certainly hope you'll continue funding it. When it initially started, I think it was at $10 million. The last couple of years, it's been at $5 million. And that doesn't go very far when you've got that many cities and counties in that population category. So that would just be another suggestion of a similar program that cities could apply for infrastructure repair.
All right. Could you give us sort of I guess it would be a breakdown of, when you're talking about the municipality infrastructure needs, how much of that recently of the monies have been spent on the roads and bridges versus the underground, like water, sewer lines, those types of infrastructure needs?
I don't know that I can answer that question because of what I said earlier. Some of the bigger cities that are receiving a bigger chunk of money might be looking at their water system. But I do know that we've got cities who are just looking at that money and looking at maybe what they can use it maybe to borrow against for big improvements. But we can try to get that information for you, but I can't really tell you how much of that has been spent on water versus how much has been spent on road paving, if that's what you're asking me. But we can try to find that out for you.
And do you know if any of your members are looking at taking the monies from the use tax diversion to use it as, to borrow against?
Yeah, I think some of them are considering that. I don't know specifically if they have, but again, we could probably do some surveys to them and find out who has done that. But that's certainly something that's been discussed, and I've heard members talk about that.
Great. All right, members of the committee, anyone questions? Senator Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I heard the word diversion. So I'm sitting here with the Chairman of Appropriations in my frame of reference. And if we divert money away from the general fund, that is the equivalent of passing an appropriation bill. So people talk about diverting money as though it's just, it's just, why wouldn't we do that? It doesn't do anything. Well, it does. It reduces the amount of funds the Chairman of Appropriations, on behalf of the rest of us, has to consider when making the next budget. So this double talk about diversions is not free money from wherever. But more critically, Mr. Chairman, as you know, if you divert sales tax to cities based on where the sales tax is collected, you will disproportionately be sending the sales tax revenue to trade centers, which frankly, because they're trade centers, as a general rule, are more prosperous than other communities. The communities that really need help are the communities that are not trade centers. By way of example, the mayor of Flowood has asked me to please stop using Flowood as an example. And the problem is old habits die hard, and it's such a great example. But if you look at sales tax revenue on a per capita basis going to Flowood, if they get any more, they're going to be like Alaska and start having to have a dividend every year to pay to their cities. But Flowood is doing great. Probably because they've got such a great mayor. That would be my guess. But, Flowood, honest to goodness, doesn't need help. The people that need help are the people that are driving to Flowood to spend money and going back home where their actual toilets are located. And Mr. Chairman, as I've mentioned before, we have had scientific studies about this, and the reports have come back to us that PP and poo-poo vary based on population, not based on sales tax collections. So if we have revenue that we're to divert to cities, which by the way I'm in favor of doing, by all means we should divert it to cities based on population, not based on where sales tax collections occurred. And so if I have to put this in the form of a question, I guess as Hayden Miller used to do, I would say, my question is, don't you agree with me?
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Other questions by committee members? Anyone? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Veazey. You've done an excellent job as always.
Thank you, and I also want to thank y'all for your leadership because we've had crazy 10 or 12, 11 months, and just from dealing with mayors and all the questions they get, I can only imagine some of the questions and concerns you've had from constituents. But I just wanted you to know that we do appreciate your leadership during this crazy time.
Well, thank you for your partnership. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. So for some housekeeping, be sure to see our committee assistants, if you haven't already, to fill out your voucher. So we want to make sure you get paid for your mileage here and back today. And also tomorrow morning, we will reconvene. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from the Mississippi Emergency Road and Bridge Fund Advisory Committee. We'll be hearing from the Mississippi Economic Council. We're excited about that. And from, of course, the Mississippi Department of Transportation. And I think some or all of our commissioners are planning to join us tomorrow. So with that, we will entertain a motion to rise and report. Thank you.